Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching this in the world. I hope you guys are doing okay. So today I watched a video by a very popular content creator called Lotus Asakura, whose content I watch regularly. I'm a fan of Lotus's work, and I think he raised an interesting discussion around Tekken's balance and how the future might pan out for the game. So shout out to Lotus, but I wanted to discuss this video that he made, which was called "This Could Potentially Ruin Tekken 8. Now this video focuses heavily on Dragunov and his representation at EVA, and that's because Dragunov was heavily represented, and for good reason. Dragunov is the strongest character in the game. That's been very apparent since day one. It was very apparent after the patch, and it's very apparent now. I made a tier list a few weeks ago and I had Dragunov as the #1 character, and I got some pushback on that placing, and I got general pushback on the tier list, which I knew would come because obviously at that time Dragunov had just been nerfed, but nerfing a character doesn't mean they're automatically weaker than others. It could mean that the character was so powerful they just need to be brought down a peg or two, but even bringing them down could still leave them in the #1 spot, and that is what I believe has happened with Dragunov. I find a lot of people's reactions were pretty knee-jerk, and that is why I maintained my position on the tier listings with Dragunov at the top, but I don't think Dragunov should actually be nerfed. We know now that the Tekken team is not going to be making any nerfs or buffs to characters until the season is over, which is going to be next year most likely. Outside of glitches and things potentially breaking in the game, I actually agree with the Tekken team's decision to not make any significant changes. I think the game is in a very good place right now, and a character considered to be the weakest in the game can definitely take on the strongest in the game. So a lot of people consider Panda or maybe Eddie or maybe Devil Jin to be the weakest characters in the game, but any of those characters can take on a Dragunov, a Feng Wei and Alessa, and definitely take the victories from them. Even using the word weaker should be taken with a pinch of salt, because nobody's actually weak in this game, and the game balance is really good, and that does include Dragunov. Dragunov, I'd say, is clearly the strongest character, but I don't think it's to the point of Leroy in Tekken 7, for example. When Leroy or Fakuran were released in Tekken 7, they were clearly head and shoulders above everybody else, with the only real exceptions being the 2D characters, which were Akuma and Geese. Dragunov, on the other hand, whilst he is the strongest, is very beatable in this game. If we were to use Dragon Ball Z power levels, if Dragunov was just over 9,000, then Yoshimitsu, who I consider to be the second strongest character in the game, would be just under. If Leroy had a power level in Tekken 7 on release, he would be in the Cell Saga and everybody else would still be fighting Raditz. It's not even comparable in my opinion. I also think that because Tekken is so large in its scope and there are so many matchups to learn and situations to deal with, constantly making changes will inevitably hurt the game in the long run. I don't think it's like Street Fighter where people complain that there were no balance updates for a very long time, because Street Fighter is a much smaller game with characters averaging about 6 to 7 moves, and obviously it's played on a 2D playing field, so there's much less going on the stages. With a game like that, it can get very boring very quickly if nothing is really changed, or it could become very frustrating when you have somebody like Ken or Luke, who are clearly favorites in the game, not being nerfed because there are just much less options in Street Fighter to deal with things. That being said, that's not to shit on Street Fighter. Street Fighter 6 is still a fantastic game in my opinion. Tekken is really the game out of all the fighting games on the market that needs the most time to breathe. You need to let the meta figure itself out, and I don't think Dragunov will be knocked off the top spot. Having said that, however, I do think that very powerful counterplay is going to be established against him because we have so many options in this game. Dragunov is relatively simple to use, and what you get in that simplicity is quite a lot. So of course people are going to flock to him, especially on the grander stage, which is EVA. Tournament players are always going to look for the easiest way to get a victory, and I can't shit on them for that, and I don't think anybody else should. If you're flying into another country or traveling to a tournament that costs a lot of money to attend, of course you're going to find the best route to victory. Also bear in mind that we are not even out of year 1 and the game is receiving updates by way of characters. The most recent inclusion being Lydia, who was initially thought to be a bit weaker than her Tekken 7 counterpart on release, but when I watched all of the major content creators break down her moves and general game plan, I couldn't disagree with them more. There is a huge difference between Tekken on paper and Tekken in play, and whilst you could probably say the same for any fighting game, I think it's much more apparent in Tekken. Lydia on paper and in practice, when comparing her to other characters, may look mediocre or even weak. I saw some very popular content creators showing similar moves that she has to other characters and saying look at what she gets versus look at what they get. But once you put her tools into play in a match, in a live setting, it is a totally different story. That's often why I never take videos seriously that display a character's moveset with the content creator saying, see, this is all she gets, whereas this character does the exact same thing and this is what they get. That is an incredibly short-sighted way of looking at a character that has 100 moves and tons of ways to play them. Everything down to animations of a move can make it troublesome in a fight. That's why characters like the bears or Safina are difficult to deal with. It's not just because they're super obscure, although that definitely plays into it. It's because they have weird, janky animations that our eyes have a hard time adjusting to, and so you end up getting hit by a lot of the odd things that you see. However, if you look at the moves on paper, say for a Zafina or the bears, and compare them to Dragunov, you might say, well see, Dragunovs are all safe and Safinas and the bears aren't. And again, that is a very short-sighted way to look at Tekken. In essence, what I'm saying is this game really needs a lot of time to breathe. I think we can all agree that Dragunov is the best character in the game, but he's no Meta Knight, he's no Shinakuma, and he's certainly no Johnny Cage. He's just a bit more simple to use than you'd expect for a character that offers you so much. Counterplay will be discovered, and it has been discovered. We saw Arslan Ash absolutely rip through people at EVO, but more players of lesser skill are also going to discover counterplay with their own characters, and it will make everybody stronger and force the Dragunov players to figure out new strategies. You don't want to nerf and buff things too much in a game this big, because I guarantee you certain things are going to fly under the radar and come to light later down the line. Let people figure things out, learn the annoying matchups, and optimize their game plans before the game gets a proper balance patch. You can see in this background footage here, I'm playing BLN Snake, who is a God of Destruction Safina and one of the best Safinas that I've seen, and this is a matchup that I really struggle in. So I requested a deathmatch with him, a 1st to 10, because it's the only way that I'm going to learn a really annoying matchup like this, and you have to take on your annoying matchups. Asking for nerfs constantly of characters or your character to be buffed is A, not going to help you as a player, and B, is probably not even warranted. They nerfed heat, and even though it's still powerful, it doesn't feel overwhelming anymore. If I sat down and really put pen to paper, I could probably find problems with the heat system, but since the nerf, off the top of my head, I'd say that there's not too much to complain about. Now, I did make a video on the top 10 changes to the heat system I'd like to see, however that was more going into the nuances of the meter and how it can be made more complex and not so simplistic like it is right now. But that could also defeat the purpose of what the Tekken team was going for in the first place. I think as tournaments go on this year and people continue to play online, I'm willing to bet that Dragunov usage will probably drop and playstyles will evolve over time. If it really is a Dragunov fest by the time we get to January, then fine. But I don't see it playing out that way, because I don't think he's so absurd that he can't be beaten. I don't think it's going to take a player of Arslan Ash's skill to overcome all of the Dragunov players that are playing at a very high level. As I said earlier, every single character in this game is highly competent and seriously competitive, so I think it's in a good place, and I think it will only get better as time goes on. One of the things about Tekken is that it can be very frustrating when you take on certain characters. I've expressed multiple times, Alisa, Lars, Zafina, these are all characters that I seriously struggle against, but I know that there is counterplay to them. I know that every character has a 10 frame punish, for example. Every character has ways to get around things. It's just the skill ceiling in this game is so incredibly high that some things can seem overwhelming. So once again, I am completely against any nerfs or buffs for now. I think the game needs to iron itself out, and the only time that I would entertain a nerf or a buff is if they include a new character and that character has not been balanced correctly. But as for all the other characters in the game, I strongly believe that everybody is in a pretty good place. Now obviously, as I've said, there are stronger characters than others, however every character in this game is competent. Don't just look at Eddie's frame data on paper and think that the character is cooked, because when you put Eddie into practice in a live match, that character is an absolute nightmare to deal with. Animations and screen noise and moving very odd on the stage do play a massive part in this game, and as I said, that is why you see such a high win rate from some of the more obscure characters. It's not just because you don't see them as much, it is also because they have a very weird way of fighting. Anyways, I'd like to know what you guys think about all of this. Let me know in the comment section below. As always guys, take care of yourselves, have a good day, and peace.